Cheers, guys. Epix 911, welcome to the Elitist Geek VR news for Wednesday, December 7th, 2016. Let's jump right into VR, guys. Start with a bit of preamble. I want to talk about yesterday's video. Most of you got that was pretty much done in jest. I mean, it does suck, but to quote the great Todd Bertuzzi, it is what it is, and that's the reality of it. So to change the topic a little bit, let's talk about Arizona Sunshine. This is a game, a virtual reality game, HTC Vive friendly. That's what I played it on yesterday. Actually recorded it for the Quick Look series, but it was a little late. Didn't have the opportunity to do editing on it, but I should have that released today. It's wave-based, but it's got zombies, and you know what? The other aspect of that is, again, even though it's wave-based, and I'm so damn tired of wave-based games, it's new. And like raw data, it allows you to move around. Unfortunately, it's only teleport that I can tell. And had they offered, some kind of smooth option, that would have been even better. But for now, I'll take the teleport and a fresh game that actually has a campaign mode in it. All in all, it wasn't bad. And like I said, I'll have that on the Quick Look up probably right after this news video. And next up, Valkyrie. It gets a new map that's for all versions. They released their Gate Crash update. So the new map is basically an ice asteroid field as your backdrop. So you're swerving in between ice asteroids. All in all, looks like a hell of a lot of fun. I'll definitely be grabbing that update and trying it out. And also PlayStation 4 Pro support with this update. So they're probably adding some lighting effects and some other enhancements if you are somebody with a PlayStation 4 Pro. And then last bit of preamble, there's a really good interview, RoadtoVR, David Jagno, who's, again, another reviewer / writer on RoadtoVR. Like a lot of his work. It's an interview with Resident Evil longtime series producer Masachika Kawada. And, he asks him several questions. One of those questions is about the move to first person and resulting VR. So the potential of VR being there now. And his answer to that, I won't spoil the whole interview. If you're interested, check it out in the link below. But essentially, the move to first person was about getting to the roots of what he felt made that horror series a good horror game. And the first person lends itself really well to virtual reality. So it really set that up as an option, as a possibility that they're now pursuing. So fantastic. Like I said, really good interview. Go check it out. It's not terribly long. You can literally have it read within about a minute. All right, first news piece. 900 SteamVR virtual reality titles on Steam. Contrast that against 25,000 Steam titles in total. That's not a bad chunk of virtual reality stuff available. Now, probably about 2/3 of that is within the last 5 to 6 months. And of course, there is a huge percentage of absolute cruft, aka crapware, in there, obviously, right? But you know what? Something that me, you, other people find crappy, someone might get some enjoyment out of that. And, there are some titles that are so craptastic that almost no one likes them, but, even with what I've tried, there may be things that I didn't like. I can only think of one game to date that I personally felt was so bad that I had to cancel it, right? There's others that are more of a novelty trick, but if the, asking price for that is in the realm of fairness, I'm okay with that. And there's definitely some good titles in that 900 chunk of virtual reality friendly apps. So with only more to come. So it's just a nice indicator that, look, there were a lot of people And part of that obviously is the fact that it's a new medium for PC gaming. Indie devs, other devs, they're going to try to capitalize on that. It makes sense. There's people with the gear starving for games. You cater to that. You're going to get a lot more coming out of the woodwork than you would for something that's been established for quite a few years. So hopefully that number increases, and hopefully it increases with a lot of quality titles to come. Next up, according to Sony, owners of Sony PlayStation VR are spending many hours with the system every day. And the article and that statement alone, aren't that impressive. They're not that amazing. I'd like to think myself, many of you guys would have expected that those people with Sony PlayStation VR units are going to spend a lot of time with them. And that, I think, to me, is the interesting part of this article, that Sony didn't think that. And it's kind of revealing because, I know the Apple attitude is very much the same. It's very pro augmented reality, but some of the reservations that they have regarding virtual reality rest on things that I find comes from quarters that haven't tried virtual reality. Now, yes, there's going to be people who try virtual reality and still don't like it. I haven't met one personally. Everyone that I've had try virtual reality walks away impressed at some level. Maybe not the level to buy it themselves, but it's usually a statement like, wow, that's a lot better than I thought it would be. So that's the surprising part for me, is that Sony didn't think that. And you can see there's almost an entire class of game devs that also, fall under that mindset and seem to cater towards that with the short, succinct, packaged titles, right? It's an experience or a game that's over fairly quickly. And obviously there's titles that completely go against the grain that are, fulfilling, things that you can do for hours at a time. I mean, I kid you not when I say I have no problem with Elite Dangerous playing it for 1 to 3-4 hours straight. Absolutely no issue. And I think for a lot of people, if the title is right, the immersion, the controls, if all of that is right, it doesn't have to be just 5 to 15, 20-minute bursts, and then people want to take the HMD off. I just don't buy that argument. And I think this is very telling that Sony is maybe coming around to not buying that anymore either, right? And I think that's a position that Oculus and Valve, for their part, hadn't prescribed to. I think they were already of the mindset that, people are going to have these things on their head if the gamer experience is right for considerable chunks of time. So I thought that was very cool. I will include the link. Check it out if you're interested below in the description per usual. Next up, RoadtoVR article, this time on Quill. Now, I've talked about Quill before. It's the art package for Oculus. But what this article focuses on isn't the art program itself, it's the interface. And at first glance, you kind of look at the interface and you think, so what? It's a 2D interface, right? That's what you'd expect. 3D, obviously, if you're wearing the HMD. But I mean, how it looks on screen, it looks like an older interface. And that's exactly what it is. And that's why it's so brilliant. It is very intuitive. Your offhand immediately switches to a tablet, your other a drawing extension. And navigating, according to the author, becomes very intuitive, very painless, and very fitting. And, he commented in the article that that is what he would like to see other interfaces do, rather than, feeling like they have to present it different somehow in VR. That doesn't have to be the case. You can stick with the traditional design. If it made sense, there, it could still make sense in VR, just to leave that as an option, as an avenue. And I think for the folks who developed Quill, it worked out really well, because after I read that article, I went on a search for feedback in general, and it is pretty much universal love for that interface. So devs, take note, check that out, and if your application is interface heavy, maybe take a page out of Quill's design book. Next up, Microsoft thinks that VR is the digital LSD of the future. Now, not going to go off on a huge drug tangent, but for those who don't know, LSD stands for lysergic acid dithylamide, or mide, depending on which pronunciation you listen to. Basically, it's ergot fungus under a whole bunch of laboratory conditions, changed extracts from that, and it's basically a psychedelic drug, which Steve Jobs himself said was probably one of the pivotal, most important things he'd ever done in his life. I'm not advocating it. I'm not saying I'm against it, for it. Just telling you what the article's talking about and what others like Steve Jobs have said about it, right? So what the article says is we will have the ability with virtual reality by 2027 for an experience very much like that. And one of the effects from something like LSD is color amplification, heightened perception via senses like your visual senses. Colors are brighter, there's melting and wave effects on patterns. So if you've got a specific type of curtain with a certain color pattern, it can look like it's breathing. Those are the types of effects. So what they're saying is that will be able to be mimicked via virtual reality. Just simple programming, correct use of other sensory technology like haptic feedback. They will be able to accomplish much the same thing that you would only otherwise get from stuff like psilocybin mushrooms, peyote, LSD. So I thought it was a neat article. So if that is an avenue of interest for yourself, check that out. There's some other links that article leads off to that are equally interesting. And if it's not for you, ignore it, move on. Next up, this one was really interesting to me. It's a podcast on RoadtoVR by Kent By, and I'm a huge fan of Kent's podcasts. They are terrific, and most mornings that I drive into work, I have an iTunes subscription for his podcasts. I basically listen to them driving into work. I got about a 35 to 45 minute commute, which is pretty much how long they are. What this one focused on today was the development of an open standard. So there's an organization that he's interviewing, one of the heads of that organization, and the discussion is literally about adopting standardized API so that it doesn't matter if you're a hardware manufacturer, if you're a developer for a game, you can use basically a common API structure. Drivers become easy, and it would accomplish really what Oculus had said in the beginning. They've kind of strayed from that a little bit. I think the HTC model most approximates right now what Oculus had said earlier and what the podcast is talking about, and that's having it open. Like most of those Steam games that I mentioned in the earlier news piece about the 900 titles, fully 800 of those are Oculus Rift friendly titles. So what this does is, rather than like a SteamVR, it takes that one step further to the driver level. So it really wraps the technology up, and access to that technology via kind of their layer around it is the easiest way to think of it. So it doesn't matter if you have the Rift or the Vive or OS VR Now, mobility will be a challenge. That's a whole other discussion, and they get into that in the podcast as well, and Kent addresses it as one of his takeaway items at the end of the video. But being able to just have any of those HMDs, load a game and have it played, does it mean it would eliminate exclusivity? Probably not. There still could be ways that companies could do that, but for the most part, it would be fairly universal. And I've used the analogy before. While it's not an exact analogy, right, the comparison, it's close to how video cards are today. So there was a time, and I've mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, the most recent time, where there were games specific to certain video cards. The video card industry moved away with that. Stuff like OpenGL, DirectX. It doesn't matter if you have an NVIDIA or an AMD card for the most part. Are there subtle driver differences? Absolutely. But for the most part, you buy a PC game off the shelf. If your CPU is capable, then it doesn't matter. Hell, even if it's an Intel GPU, depending on the game. But if it's accelerated using GPU functionality, yeah, it's going to work on your NVIDIA. It's going to work on your AMD. So I definitely like, the lure of an open system. I think it's fantastic. I think ultimately that's the direction we're going to head, because there's having it standardized like that, in my opinion, there doesn't have to be clear winners and losers. Sure, there's going to be market share considerations. You're going to have companies that do better. Between NVIDIA and AMD, one does better than the other on a quarterly fiscal basis, but both are viable and they're running economical GPU manufacturing, their sales, their revenue, everything is stable. And on the virtual reality side of that, when you get too exclusive and too locked in, you can have clear winners and losers. In other words, if you back the candidate that can only play its small subset of games, can't play any others, they may fold, and then you're left with useless hardware. So ultimately, I think it's very promising. I do think we're moving towards that. And the other thing that they talk about in the podcast is the companies, and I'll have a picture up, that are involved in this are all willing to continue the discussion to move towards that. And they're not just represented by Oculus and HTC, both of which are there, but game companies that do development, game engines like Epic is represented. So yeah, very cool, lots of potentials. But then, of course, the challenge of mobility remains. All right, guys, that is it for the news today. As always, cheers, and definitely catch you on the VR flip side.